today I am joined by Melissa Corrigan of Blue Amp Media. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, so we were connected by our good friend Cliff Schechter, and you have been
Yes.
doing some very interesting work in the context of what's going on down in the Caribbean and around Venezuela. And so, tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing down there and what you think that indicates vis-a-vis what you think the Trump administration's ultimate objectives are.
Sure. Okay, so a little over 50 days now ago, I'm a Navy vet. I still have connections with people in the DoD and active duty service. And about 52 days ago now, I got a signal message late at night with a document attached. And as I read through that document over and over and over, I took about three times to really process what I was reading. It really struck me the gravity of what I was reading and how I needed to proceed with that document. So, what the document told us was that there was significant illegal activity going on board the USS Iwo Jima. And what that is that the detainees were brought on board one of those boat strikes. There were two surviving individuals. They were brought on board the Iwo Jima, and the shipboard personnel began doing their standard protocol, which is to video the process of onboarding those detainees.
Hmm.
They captured video, and just a few hours later, they were ordered to delete the video. So the shipboard personnel, which were enlisted personnel, pushed back. They cited the standing protocol, the law, the code, and the Geneva Convention. And ultimately, the order was reaffirmed, and it was said verbatim that this order came from the admiral. We're literally not sure which admiral issued that order because the day prior, Halsey had indicated his intention to resign. So we're not sure who in the chain of command was actually responsible at that point. And they did, in fact, delete that information. So the document I received was a statement and a really detailed outline from shipboard personnel who were outlining what they saw was a grievous a just unfathomable breach of protocol as well as probably law. And they felt that they were witnessing unlawful orders in action. And so they reached out. So, what I did was I took that information and began contacting individuals. The sources indicated right up front they didn't want this to go to the press. This wasn't a New York Times headline.
Hmm.
They wanted this to get to someone who could conduct oversight. So I reached out through a chain of other veterans. I'm proud to say that it was just all veterans were involved in this mission, and we were able to quietly get that to the desk of a senator who is on the Armed Services Oversight Committee. And only when that document was on that senator's desk and another senator reached out to the sources and they spoke, and there was legal representation involved through the orders project. So only when the sources felt incredibly comfortable that all their bases were covered did they then say, okay, we want this to go public and we would like for you to share it. And probably because I'm a Navy vet and I could use the correct terminology and also use terminology that insulated those sources a little bit. And so that's what I did last Saturday is when we broke this story.
So first and foremost, thank you for your service and thank you for the service you're continuing to do. What would be the normal protocol on the Iwo Jima, which is like a big like command ship? It's like sort of looks like sort of
Right.
a mini aircraft carrier, right?
Right. It's an amphibious assault ship. So the protocol is typically the same across most Navy vessels. It does vary slightly from ship to ship. Each one has their own protocol. But
Right.
essentially, anytime you're pulling someone out of the water and bringing them on board a U.S. vessel, you're going to want to record that. And that's for the protection of everybody involved, for the detainees, and also for the shipboard personnel in case those detainees were to claim later that there was some sort of mistreatment going on. The standard procedure is always to document rather than not document.
Right, because I assume that there's not many things in the armed forces, let alone the Navy, that don't have a plan or some protocol that go along
Correct.
with them. Specifically a naval vessel fishing a couple of dudes out of the Caribbean, right?
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. The document also laid out a scene, and this was beyond the deletion of material. This was truly shocking to me. So the Marines actually brought the detainees on board. And as they were bringing them on deck, there was a back and forth between the shipboard personnel and the Marines because the Marines came on board and said, "Hey, the Commodore said no video." And so, right off the bat, there was a misalignment of protocol and procedure between the Marines and the Navy. And I was on an aircraft carrier, I've worked with Marines. I've never, ever seen or heard of a situation where, in the moment like that, there was a push and pull over whose boss do we listen to, because we all have ultimately the same boss. So that scenario that was pictured in the document was truly shocking to me because it showed a fundamental fracture in the lowest ranks. These are enlisted men and women who are
Mm,
actually carrying out these functions. And apparently, the ineptitude and the confusion at the top in the Pentagon has filtered down to our bottom ranks of enlisted men and women. So they aren't even sure in the moment whose protocol to follow. What protocol are we following? And,
mhm.
that's the idea of protocol. So you know what to do.
Well, so just so we're clear, so you have the amphibious assault ship or any naval vessel. Um, that vessel belongs to the Navy. The
Correct.
commanding officer of that vessel has ultimate responsibility and accountability, and I would assume authority for what happens on board. I don't want to call the Marines passengers necessarily, but I wouldn't assume that they have any sort of operational control over what happens on deck, below
Right.
decks, on the bridge. Even whoever the commanding officer of the Marines is, probably doesn't out wouldn't outrank the commanding officer, the captain or commander, whoever it is, of that vessel, right? So I would think that that would put that particular officer, that commanding officer, in a bad position too, because now things
Right.
are happening on board his vessel that he will ultimately be responsible for or held responsible for.
Right. Right. And that's what the entire layout of the way the confusion, it went up to the PAO, the press affairs officers, and then it went to JAG. And JAG is who ultimately issued the final order, citing the admiral is passing this order down to delete that information. So that would far bypass the CO of the ship.
And why would they what would be the reason why they'd want this video squashed or erased? Why would what had they beaten
So we
these
can
guys
only,
up?
right, we can only wonder what the motivation was. One of the detainees was returned, so they were held on the Iwo Jima for just shy of 26 hours,
Mhm,
and then they were each quietly repatriated to each of their home countries, one to Ecuador and one to Colombia. The detainee that was returned to Colombia was in very bad medical condition. He arrived in Colombia on a ventilator. He
mm,
had a cerebral fracture. And so it's obvious that he survived a boat strike, so that those injuries very well could have come from the boat strike, but without that video we don't know. And so that leaves us with this huge diplomatic gap where the Colombian president could and did, when he received that detainee, make a public statement that, hey, I just received this guy from the United States in horrible condition. He's in the hospital. And furthermore, if you wanted me to prosecute him, you shouldn't have blown up the evidence, because now I have no choice than to
right,
let
to
him
let him
go.
go. Right.
So both of those men, the Ecuadorian president and the Colombian president, both released each of the men because they had no evidence to charge them with anything.
Um, let me ask you, there's obviously a maritime law that goes back hundreds of years, that I'm sure much of that has been incorporated into naval code, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as far as the Navy is concerned. I saw a video the other day, though, of the Coast Guard, who has typically been tasked with drug interdiction missions, I think. And that's not to say other forces haven't been involved, but I think you mostly think of the Coast Guard, where there was a video of a Coast Guard personnel basically using a high powered, like 50 caliber rifle to blow off the engine of one of these boats and bring it to a halt, saying that, well, okay, the guy had to slow down. Okay, they had to get close enough to do all this, but it is possible to interdict some of these boats without I assume, a missile strike of
Exactly.
some kind.
Right, and that's
Um,
what we're seeing. The Coast Guard is showing us in real time that you can follow the standard protocol and still accomplish your end goal
right,
without
and
blasting
if
the boat.
so we have these problems. So we have the protocol rupture on board the Iwo Jima. We have the Coast Guard showing that you do not. I mean, lethal force is sometimes necessary, right? If they're shooting at you, you're going to have every right to shoot
Right.
back. But we also don't know what these boats are or who is on them. And as I've understood it too, Melissa, is again, you're going to be the expert in any sort of watercraft, right? Compared to me, is a lot of these boats too, like maybe 100, 200-mile range at best. Maybe they could meet up with
Right.
somebody. But a lot of these guys weren't heading for American shores to begin with, or most of them are, if
Correct.
any of them
They
are.
they wouldn't have been able to make it. They don't have the capacity to make it. And so, yeah, that's one point is that there again, if you're going to blow up the potential evidence, how are we to ascertain what type of vessel it was, what extra, modifications they may have made to it, if they're going to claim that these vessels are absolutely headed for the United States, which is what Pete Hegseth is hinging this argument on.
Right.
The reason that the JAG officer came back with for why they were deleting this evidence, because the shipboard personnel was pushing back hard. Obviously, none of these enlisted men or women want to have this on their record as the one who deleted this stuff. So they
Right.
were pushing back. They were asking, they were pointing to protocol and law. So what the JAG officer came back with was this term, unprivileged belligerence. And she said, because these detainees had been classified as unprivileged belligerents, then we no longer have to follow Geneva Convention. And it is a really gray loophole in the Geneva Convention, this unprivileged belligerence term. And I think it's interesting that one of the places this term has come up before in investigations and inquiries is Guantanamo Bay,
Right.
because the detainees that were abused in Guantanamo Bay, that was the reason that was given that their abuse was okay, was because they fell under uh, this loophole of unprivileged belligerence. And what that means is you don't have to give them the Geneva Convention protections as a civilian or as a POW. So you really don't have to give them any protections at all. It's a really messy loophole, and that's the reason that was given. My question is, okay, two things. First of all, the procedure to categorize any individual as an unprivileged belligerent has to come after a tribunal. And that tribunal can be conducted in the field. There can be a field tribunal. We don't have any evidence that that happened. Um, and the second
Unless
thing
it
is
happened in the cockpit of an F-18 right before he launched a Hellfire missile at them, right?
exactly. And and the other thing is, even if you were going to classify them, once recording began, once you have video recording, what's the point in deleting that? What's the harm in keeping that material?
Right. Well, so this seems to be okay. Let me back up. So you mentioned Guantanamo. So now we're back into the global war on terror post nine
Right.
11. Um, Afghanistan, everywhere, rendition, all these other things. These guys are ending up in these places. Um, and now you have JAG officers who, again, I don't know where they're getting their guidance, but I assume JAG officers don't do much again without guidance. This seems downstream of a lot of other things that we've done over the past 20 years or so. But has the military legal community become so inured to this stuff that they're just like, well, this is what the boss has said, so this is what we're going to do.
Well, the military legal community was gutted back in February. I mean,
Mm,
they disposed of a great number of JAG and then appointed several JAG that we believe are Trump loyalists, and they're just going to do whatever he wants them to do. And so we don't know if this order came all the way from the president, if the president's even aware or awake of what's happening. So Hegseth is,
aware is a
you
lot
know,
more likely than awake at this point.
right. So, with most great leaders, we've heard the phrase the buck stops here and they take
Mhm.
accountability. Hegseth is trying to avoid accountability on this and push it back down to the admirals. And another interesting, I mean, there's layers upon layers to this. An interesting point is, what day did Admiral Halsey actually turn over command? Who was actually the admiral referenced in that document? Because it just says the admiral. And without that name, Halsey went public with his intent to resign on the 16th.
Right.
We also believe that this strike happened on the 16th as well. And that means those individuals, because the report indicated they were picked up on the 17th. These individuals were in the water for 24 hours, potentially.
Right.
So the timeline is very fuzzy. There are differing timelines. If you look at CNN reporting on this versus NPR reporting on this, there's different timelines through different sources, and they all are quoting Pete Hegseth. So he's reporting on a misalignment of timelines. It's a mess. It's a mess. And it's really going to come down to which admiral ultimately gave that order. And with Halsey on his way out the door, I don't know. I mean, could this have been a situation where this strike happened? There are two survivors. We know the double tap happened in September. Is this something where Halsey said, I'm done, I'm out, I'm not ordering another strike? You figure out what to do with these two guys. I'm resigning. So the timing is absolutely, you know, interesting as an understatement. Yeah.
So let's talk about the rules of engagement too. Is it that they see a boat, they launch an aircraft or a drone or however it is they're doing this, and that boat is considered fair game? Are there rules of engagement? How are these decisions being made? Is it just there's a Reaper drone flying overhead, they see something in the water and they decide, okay, go zap it?
Right. We are being led to believe there's some sort of intel that they're privy to, that they just absolutely know that these boats have drugs on them. Obviously, carrying drugs through open international waters is not an act of war. It's not an act of war, and it's not something that demands an immediate death sentence as well. So, the foremost expert on this, a Canadian brigadier general, retired, Kenneth Watkin, has been writing specifically about the term unprivileged belligerent. I would call
Mhm.
him, this is just coming from me, but I would call him the foremost living expert on that topic. He began writing on this topic in 2004, or I'm sorry, 2003, particularly around U.S. involvement with Guantanamo Bay. And he wrote again in 2017 on the term unprivileged belligerent. And he's been really quiet for a while, but I found it really interesting that he did publish a piece about a week and a half ago. And he gave his judgment on the entire situation, that these bow strikes are unlawful. So what Pete Hegseth is trying to do is to use that unprivileged belligerent sort of track, and to say that because these ships are headed northward towards the United States and they are carrying chemical weapons, is what he's calling the drugs, then he can consider this an act of hostility that would render these otherwise civilians to be unprivileged belligerents. And then that's how he can justify aggression against them.
Right. Again, they're not coming here, right? They're headed for like Europe. And again, I got
Right.
no love for drug dealers. Don't get me wrong. I got no love for cartels.
Exactly.
What concerns me, Melissa, is what all of this is the predicate for, right?
Right.
What are they? They're blowing up these guys. You know, I think that even I think going back to what maybe World War I or World War II, and long before, the idea is like you don't kill guys in the water, right? If you've sunk
Right.
their ship, right, and they're alive, like you go fish them out.
Right.
And when those things haven't happened, there have been consequences either immediate or downstream. So what in your experience and in your analysis so far, what do you think is there a long game? Do they have an idea? I know they're threatening Maduro. Um, I've written a lot about this, that there's really no good reason, there's no moral reason so far, there's no
Right,
legal reason, there's no, again, it's not like these guys are driving their boats up on the coast of Galveston, Texas, and like holding people hostage or invading,
right.
right? Not and then the other part is the cocaine is coming from Colombia and the fentanyl is coming from Mexico. So Venezuela, yes, is a transshipment point. Yes, it has cartels, but those cartels are, near as I can tell, responsible for very, very little of the drugs getting into the United States, if at all.
Exactly. And I'm a veteran of the Operation Iraqi Freedom, and this smacks of weapons of mass destruction. It
Yeah,
smacks of we are going to give the public something that they can get mad about, something that inflames their emotions in order to justify the invasion of another country. And, George Washington and other founding fathers did not want a standing army for this very reason. If
right,
you had to go around and collect militiamen to get them on your side to go invade another country, they would have to be 100% bought in order for that to happen. They
right,
would have to feel like our nation is in grave danger of an invasion. That's what it would take to get a ground militia to voluntarily go do this. And when you misuse a standing army, or in this case, Navy, in this fashion, it goes against the foundation of what our military is designed to do. So I think they're using the drug aspect, calling the label of narco terrorism is a convenient excuse to attempt to get the military on board with this, and then by extension the American people.
well, there was a CBS survey, YouGov survey, late November, right before Thanksgiving. Obviously, we're 3 weeks past that now, but 70% of Americans had said they were opposed to military
Right.
action against Venezuela. The things that I have written about, and you guys can find those on the home front, is again, there's no broad justification for this. There's no legal justification. There's no moral justification. If you go through the rules, there are set down what makes a just war. There's 6 different pieces, you guys can read about it.
Right.
We fail all of them. Not to mention, you mentioned weapons of mass destruction, Vietnam, right?
Yes.
Afghanistan. Like, there's one door into these places, and there's rarely a door out of them. As I wrote,
Exactly.
I think maybe yesterday, like we had to go to Iraq for militias to appear right after Saddam left.
Hmm.
They already exist in Venezuela, right? Either it's either the cartels themselves, it's these guys that run around the neighborhoods terrorizing people. There's a bunch of Colombians, at least two different Colombian groups that are attacking the Colombian government. They hide out in Venezuela in safe havens, and so to create further chaos is good only, I think, near as I could tell, for the cartels in the analysis I've read. And hard to believe, Melissa, that there's not a lot of guys down there who would not love loading up their AK-47s and taking shots at guys with American flags on their shoulders.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I've talked about this at length. When I was in the military, I remember the day that all of the television screens on the ship, on base, in every gym, on the mess decks went from ESPN and BET and stuff like that to Fox News.
Mm,
Fox News became everywhere. And unfortunately, as you talk to these young military guys now, they're starting to talk about the hemisphering, and they're starting to use terminology that's very far right fringe terminology. And part of that is because they have just been inundated with Fox News everywhere they go on a military installation on the base. So you have a lot of military guys that are bought into this for all the wrong reasons. These are also young men who have grown up on Call of Duty, and their concept of warfare is very false. It's very fake. It's very virtual. And my concern is, number one, this is going to be another Vietnam. You're talking about cartels that are going to participate in this warfare that are guerrilla warfare fighters. They're not going to fight by the laws of war. They're not going to abide by any gentleman's code when it comes to fighting. So it is going to be like Vietnam. It's going to be like Afghanistan. It's going to be like Iraq. We are going to see civilians taking up arms and fighting back. And those young men who I believe have been brainwashed, is the best term that I can use, for years on these military installations, receiving no input but Fox News, and encouraged in their ideations politically, are going to hit the shore ready to fight like it's Call of Duty. And reality is going to slap them in the face, and we're going to have yet another generation of young men who are going to come home, if they do come home, with severe mental health issues. And right when the VA has now cut those mental health resources.
Well, and we've just done an abominable job of taking care of the young men and women who've come home,
Right.
regardless, for
Hmm.
20 years of war. And and politically and philosophically too, Melissa, that part of Donald Trump's whole thing was like no foreign wars.
Right.
We don't want to
Right. No
do
foreign
this
wars.
anymore. I mean, I remember, so last year I was in London and I was doing a panel as part of something that a conversation that Mehdi Hassan was having. And I'm sitting next to a young guy who was head of sort of MAGA for Europe, probably in his early 30s. Nice enough guy, I mean, we're just talking, and he said, because as a former Republican, he goes, we killed your party. And I said, I know. And he said, and if we had it our way, remember, this is a guy who represents MAGA in Europe. If we had it our way, Dick Cheney would be in The Hague, right? This seems,
Hmm.
these sorts of actions seem a long way away from a lot of what the fundamentals of what MAGA diehards really want. And you see that the two Republicans in Congress who have been willing to join with Democrats against use of force have been Thomas Massie, both from Kentucky, Thomas Massie, member of Congress of the House from Kentucky, and then Rand Paul, who's sort of refining his
Right.
libertarian isolationist roots. But the whole point was America first. And a lot of this seems like pick your theory, wagging the dog, right? Trump's having a lot of trouble here at home. He doesn't know how to do this. Obviously, a nice little foreign war is always a good way to sort of rally to the flag. Is it the oil, right? Venezuela is sitting on a boatload of oil. Oh, well, it's not great oil. Yeah, it's still the largest reserve in the world,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
If they're willing to go grind up rocks in northern Alberta, Canada to get crappy oil, I promise you they're happy to go to
Yes.
Lake Maracaibo too, right?
Right.
And then, what else is going down there? I can't imagine the Brazilians want this. I can't imagine the Colombians or the Peruvians or anybody other than the crazy guy in Argentina. Nobody wants American Marines on their shores.
Right. Right. And it goes, there's so much wrapped up in that. You're right. From the time he got in office, the guy who wanted no foreign wars first tried to go after Greenland, then tried to go after Canada. It's like he's been trying to pick a fight with somebody. Who will fight me? Anybody. Let's try and pick fights all over the globe, even though I just ran on no more foreign wars. And I think you're right. I think Americans, if there's anything they can unite on right now, it's that. This is part of what enraged me and enraged all of the veterans involved in this project of getting this document to that senator, was that these are our enlisted men and women who are now sitting on ships in the Caribbean during their holidays, missing their holidays with their family. For what? For what? This isn't something you can point to as, Venezuela attacked us and we are defending ourselves. We are out, you know, doing some good
Right.
deed, or leading the charge on some righteous cause. These people are not bought in. These enlisted men and women are not bought in. I've spoken with someone from the Orders Project, and they've spoken with multiple people on those ships in Southcom who are reaching out for legal counsel. So that lets me know that this situation that I reported on is most likely than not the only one where there are unlawful orders or questionable orders. If you have multiple service people reaching out for legal advisement, those are huge red flags. Like I said, I served in Iraq. I don't know of anybody that was calling for legal representation and advisement, um, anywhere on the ground in Baghdad or on a ship anywhere, because we weren't being given orders like that. Now, there were definitely individual exceptions,
Sure.
but it did not come down from the Pentagon. You saw failures way down the chain in terms of Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib or anything like that. Those were failures of individuals way down the chain of command. You didn't see orders coming down from the Pentagon to delete content.
Right. Well, again, incompetence is rife here. And let me just say this, and anybody who, if you post something here on Substack or on social media anywhere, and it says like we should not go to war in Venezuela, and somebody goes, oh, so you're on the side of the drug dealers, say that is BS, right? Like
Yeah.
it is perfectly patriotic to say that we should not put young American women, men
Yes.
and women, in harm's way for no good reason, right? If we do this, young Americans will be killed, they will be
Yes.
maimed, they will be captured, right? All of these things. What did was it Dwight Eisenhower said, right? Every plan works until first contact with the enemy. Or
Yes.
to use it in Mike Tyson's parlance, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? These
Right.
things never go the way anybody thinks they're going to go, right? And I can say this, that we can and must hold two thoughts in our heads simultaneously. Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy. He is a dictator, and he and Hugo Chavez ahead of him helped create the broken and failed state that Venezuela is today. That does not mean that getting rid of him is one, our job, or two, will lead to any better outcome for the American people. All right, Melissa, before I let you go, where can everybody find you?
Oh, you can find me at Blue Ant Media on Substack. We are hitting the ground running. We've just started up this project with David Schuster and Cliff Schechter, and we've just brought Ellie Leonard on board, who is breaking our Epstein news 1 week at a time, which is staggering. So yeah, find us there on Substack and follow. I've got a follow-up piece coming up because there's been some interesting connections on Pete Hegseth serving at Guantanamo Bay right about the time that those human rights violations were reported, and he doesn't seem too eager to talk about that time. So I'm going to dig in and find out why.
Well, and there's a reason why now you have Matt Gaetz and Laura Loomer as journalists sitting in the Pentagon
Right.
briefing room. As always, gang, please go to the home front and subscribe there too. You can read all of my pieces on Venezuela. I will have more to come. As always, guys, thanks for joining. Melissa, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and getting this story amplified. I want it everywhere. I want everybody to be calling their congressmen and senators and saying, hey, can you ask Pete Hegseth why we're deleting video of detainees on U.S. Navy vessels?
And guys, I will be back in just about 20 minutes talking about monopolies with Basil Musabarash, and I hope I said his name correctly. So don't go far. I will see you soon. Everybody else, have a good day. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.